Another video. Here we go. This one, I got to try to keep it for some people who are familiar with my older videos. I used to be really specific when calling out some of the unsavory elements within what's popularly known as the elite or the deep state. But I'm going to post this on my regular channel, so I'm going to have to be a bit more diplomatic with my language. But I've been saying for quite a while, since I started doing these videos here on YouTube, that Syria is going to be partitioned, and it looks like that's actually what's happening now. Now Russia has acted a lot different lately than it had earlier in the conflict, where they would go for these. For me, from the onset, all these so-called peace negotiations and also the ceasefires, I knew that those were no good from the very beginning, because every time that Russia would tie Assad's government's hand and say, "Hey, let's negotiate, let's make safe zones, let's stop advancing for a second," what would end up happening is that the terrorists would rearm, retool, and resupply men and Salafi prostitutes via Turkey. You know, they would have women who want to be, what they call them, the polite way, they call them jihadi brides. But if you watch some of the behind the scenes, real um, undercover journalism and what was the Islamic State, a lot of these women would end up marrying multiple guys, 20 guys in a weekend. Um, but I digress from the major point. These ceasefires would allow the terrorists to rearm, re-equip, retool, and that happened every time. That's evident because we've seen that Palmyra had to be liberated twice. And unfortunately, more World Heritage sites were lost when the terrorists reoccupied Palmyra. Now, recently in the past few months, perhaps maybe 6 to 9 months, Russia has not been so lenient, but the damage is done. The United States, throughout Obama's time, he he played the Syrian war really in a slick way. The same way he thought his tactics and what happened in Libya, Obama and his handlers, the people who really run the show, and I'm not gonna say who that is. It's my other channels for, but the people behind the scenes thought that they could pull the same gimmick they did in Libya, label the leader a tyrant and a butcher. They love calling Assad a butcher. He's a butcher. He's killing his own people. Actually, he's killing international Salafi terrorists, along with some Salafi terrorists that are homegrown. So let's get that out of the way. The pocket in eastern Ghouta is a terrorist enclave. There's no, I mean, I don't know anything else you can call it. It's a terrorist enclave. Now, it's unfortunate, but what's happening now is Nikki Haley is ratcheting up pressure and hostile rhetoric against Assad. Another tactic that the terrorists have been using from early on in the conflict is this whole notion of chemical attacks. The terrorists launch the chemical attacks and they blame Assad in hopes that the government, our government here in the United States, actually supports them in their efforts. And under Obama, it really wasn't as large a presence. But as soon as it was transitioning from Obama to Trump, more American boots ended up on the ground, to the point where one report I saw said there may be as many as 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria. It's ridiculous, but the special forces have been there from the very onset with the Kurds. And if Russia was smarter, and if they fought this conflict better, what they would have done was they would have told Assad there never would have been any ceasefires. They would have told Assad, and the bombing campaign would have been much more aggressive. than it already was. And what should have happened was Iranians, the Russians should have announced that the Iranians should have sent regular soldiers also, and the popular mobilization units could have met them at the border, and they could have taken Syria back east of the Euphrates, the oil and gas rich portion of Syria. But what happened was Russia was being diplomatic with the United States. And that was a bad move. It was a strategic fail because all the United States was doing was stalling until they can get what the Israelis like to call facts on the ground. It's the same way that Israel creates settlements and other impediments for a Palestinian state, and then they say, well, now there's facts on the ground. We can't just withdraw to the 67 borders. There's a new reality, and unfortunately, that's what's happened with Syria. Syria will be partitioned. I don't see any way. I hope I'm wrong, by the way, but I don't see any way around it because east of the Euphrates is going to be some sort of a Kurdistan, I suspect, or whatever they want to call their pseudo-communist enclave that they claim they want to build. But it'll also be a covert base for Israeli attacks against Iran, probably. Very unfortunate. Um, I don't see any other possibility. Another part that will be partitioned is going to be near. I think it's called Al Tanf, and it's a border area between Iraq and Syria in the southeast, and it's also near the Jordanian border. Parts of that terrorist enclave actually touch the Jordanian border, so they can get Salafi jihadists. Because if Turkey ever really changes its mind and stop allowing itself to be used as a transit point, they'll have that part of Jordan to send Salafi terrorists into Syria from. But another factor was the Turks from the very beginning. The Turks have actually. I did a video in the past where I said Erdogan was stupid, but actually Erdogan was actually pretty smart. Not as smart as he would like to think, but he was smart enough because the Turks are actually going to come off a winner, and they're pretending to disagree with the United States, but they're not going to do anything to stop a Kurdistan or that enclave in east of the Euphrates from becoming independent of the Assad government. Finally, they're also going to take the region of Afrin. The Turks are going to take that. Syria is partitioned. It's done. And the parts near the Golan also where there are other Salafi terrorist factions, including ISIS, who the Israelis give medical care to. Now they have a buffer zone between the Golan Heights is already occupied, illegally annexed territory. Because there's a de facto annexation of the Golan by Israel. So it's already illegally occupied. Now they're going to have another buffer zone. Total. The best hope for this conflict now is that it doesn't bleed the Syrian government down. So Syria, at some point, the Syrian government is going to have to start rebuilding, and hopefully they're able to get rid of that nuisance in Ghouta, and they could keep Damascus relatively safe from rockets and shells from these terrorists, and they could actually start a rebuilding, and maybe the terrorists will give up and go to these enclaves that they built. And you see it in the media, even in the mainstream media, and in some cases, they'll actually show the so-called Sunni majority areas where the Salafi terrorists and other Sunni terrorists have ruled, and the people actually say, no, we didn't. The terrorists were cruel, brutal. We didn't have any food. They would take all the aid. You actually see this, and they actually welcome the Assad government back. But it's very unfortunate what's happened to Syria. But it looks like it's been partitioned. It's de facto partitioned, but it's a fact. It's de facto. It's a facto. They've actually partitioned Syria, weakened it. The best hope now is that the PMUs take the entire Iraqi territory back, including that pocket of ISIS that the United States and the brave Kurds claim they can't eliminate because of what's going on in Afrin. And it'll be great if Iraq could take their entire territory back to popular mobilization units, and there's still a land corridor, or there's a land bridge. And I hate to use that language because I think that's what the Israelis call it, but it basically keeps Tehran all the way to Damascus being able to traverse via a land route, which is important because, as I've said in the past, Iran is the last independent government, perhaps in the region. They're the only government with no Bank for International Settlements central bank. That's it. After Iran, there's no significant countries with significant resources. Cuba is another country, but they don't have the depth of resources and geostrategic location as Iran. And North Korea is heavily dependent on China. So, and if they're foolish enough to get rid of their nukes, they'll be next on the chopping block. Because the United States is playing a dangerous winner-take-all game on behalf of the New World Order. I mean, we had former senators say it. I think his name was Traficant. He said we're involved in wars that have little or no interest to us. That's exactly what's happening. The United States is being used as a hammer for the New World Order, and it's very unfortunate. But that's where we are. Once these last three countries with no BIS Rothschild Bank fall, the whole world is in a one world government overtly, because having an international mother bank of all banks, and that right there, the financial intertwining of the world, even if you have different puppets and so-called governments, it's still one world government. But I'm digressing. That's it for now. Check out my other channel, Great Society Ministries, where I talk more on these issues, religion and politics. So that's it for now.